all of these inconveniences and setbacks come as the result of the individual being unable to concentrate his faculties upon the things he is doing. Fatigue or scatteredness deprive him of the necessary coordination. We know what are called accident-prone people. They can find an accident anywhere. They seem to be born to fall, stub their toes, bang their fingers, and things of that nature. There seems to be no reason why this occurs. It is simply due to interior lack of coordination. Also, thoughtlessness often causes the person to expose himself unnecessarily to hazards. He climbs too high on an insecure ladder. He engages in some do-it-yourself project that is a little beyond his capacity. This type of situation should cause us to look within, to see if we can find out why these kind of things happen, why our life can be a continuous sequence of irritations, while another person seemingly has a much easier time. Most of our troubles arise from pushing. The individual has some kind of drive behind him. Now, drive can be initiative, but it can also be psychic irritation. Certain disturbances affecting the body will cause the pulse to become more rapid. And this increasing rapidity is not an indication that the heart is a healthier heart, but rather that it may be a toxic heart, that it may be under irritation, which stimulates function, but does not result in any actual improvement in the circulation system. In fact, this stimulation may ultimately destroy the health of the heart. On another level, the individual makes use of stimulants to increase drive. He may depend upon his cup of coffee as an eye-opener in the morning. He may depend upon his cocktail in the afternoon to keep going. In both of these cases, he is not actually adding anything to the substance of his strength or energy. He is simply whipping himself. And like the old horse that was whipped, he will ultimately fall under this strain, which is not being supported by any increasing strength or any increasing vitality in himself. We also notice, with some apprehension, the life expectancies of various occupations. And one of the most interesting of these expectancy patterns deals with the athlete. We would assume that a man who is in athletics and spends most of his life keeping his body in trim should have a long life expectancy. But if his form of athletics is too strenuous or too hazardous, we find the reverse. And many a person who has devoted most of his life to physical culture is dead at 50. The reason here is that he has overtaxed his resources, that he has put too great a strain upon his structure, and the structure has ultimately broken down. Moderate exercise would have given him a long life. Inordinate exercise has shortened his life. We then realize the importance of the Socratic axiom of moderation. All things being equal, moderation not only extends life, but moderation in action extends efficiency. The individual who is moderate in his ways, both in his ambitions and in his actions, such an individual has the greatest probabilities of a successful and adjusted life. Immoderation for any reason or for any motive is usually the cause of disaster. Now, many persons would feel that if they are immoderate in a good cause, this should constitute immunity from ill results. Unfortunately, nature does not recognize causes of this nature. The individual who sacrifices himself to some noble purpose may achieve a great good, but if he violates any of the laws of his own integration, he will suffer personally for the violation that he has caused. Therefore, all stress or strain, regardless of motive, should be subject to careful thought. The individual must expect to pay his natural debts, regardless of the reason why he incurred these debts. All of this has a bearing on our principal theme, which is ego pressure. The person moving pressurefully from within himself tears his way through his own body and attempts to tear his way through his world. The very pressures which he exerts will result inevitably in resistances. And these resistances require greater expenditures of energy to break through them. Very often we are not successful in breaking through. Then we have a grand frustration over the whole matter. But even if we do break through, it is with a tremendous expenditure of vitality. Vitality in man is not an inexhaustible fountain. The life of the person seems to have a general energy allotment. We can spend a little more or a little less, but we cannot break through the general pattern of our own available vitality. This vitality differs with different persons. Some have more abundant energies than others, but each must study his own energy equivalents and quotients and try to live within his vital means, even as he tries to live within his economic means. Extravagance of energy is as dismal as extravagance of funds, and the person who is extravagant frequently finds himself in a serious predicament. If, therefore, we wish to chart a life, plan a life, wish to make certain achievements within the broad pattern of living, perhaps the first thing we should study is our energy allotment. We should begin to analyze the degree of available vitality that we possess. This is a little more complicated than first appears, because some individuals have more vitality than they suspect and are simply lazy. Others do not have as much vitality as they believe and consequently exhaust themselves before their time. To determine approximately what we can do, how long and how often we can use certain qualities of energy, what our probabilities are of recuperation from exhaustion, the degree of stress and strain by means of which our attitudes are exhausting or depleting our energy reserves. These things we must study. The first and most obvious cause of energy depletion, of course, is activity, labor, work, profession. These natural, vocational, and avocational uses of energy, however, do not, for the most part, represent an exhausting factor. The individual today is not as exhausted by his work as he is by his attitudes. There was a time when the average person was unable to conserve enough energy from the labor of existing to provide himself with a cultural life of importance. Today, this is largely untrue. The average person can develop a reasonably strong personal culture if he so desires. It is absence of desire that leaves man today without the incentives or without the available means of attaining culture. Now, by culture, we do not simply mean a certain intellectualism. By culture, I mean a mature, personal, internal life. A life that is rich with growing and knowing. A life that is interiorly gracious, poised, calm, and sufficient. And an inner life in which faith is stronger than fear in all of the critical situations that arise. The attainment of such interior integration is possible to modern man. And even though we live in hectic times and under tremendous expenditures of money and time, we have never before had the opportunity for as great a cultural existence as now. Unfortunately, however, we have developed a series of culture escapes. We have settled down to an ingenious method of wasting time. We have become so imbued with certain fallacies of our day that we are not directing our available energies to any essentially important end. The reason here is not fatigue, but psychic lack of orientation. With half of our population neurotic, it is evident that we will not ordinarily make good use of opportunity. A neurotic person is already in a situation in which he is resistant to self-improvement. The neurotic person is like an individual with a minor pain. The only problem that concerns him is to get rid of the pain. In this case, get rid as far as he can, or submerge as much as possible, the particular problems around which his neurosis centers. So today, man, with more leisure than he ever possessed before, is perfectly content to spend most of that leisure time looking into a television set. He considers this as his culture life. And as we examine the programs more carefully, we realize that the cultural content is not as high as it might be. There are moments in which we may doubt that it is satisfying to the interior life of the individual. It is not a means of enrichment. It is simply a rather foolish way of trying to forget something. The person who lives only to forget will generally have a rather poor life, because actually he is giving his problem far too much importance in his own nature. If it is important enough to forget, it is difficult to forget. If he must keep his mind on escaping it continuously, the problem grows greater than the escape, and we pass from one excessive attitude to another. To meet this type of situation, we have to study what we are, what we can do, what we want to do. And among our people at the present time, if we sit down with the average family and we simply say to these people, if you could do exactly what you want to do, what would you like to do with your life? This usually stops the person in his tracks. It takes him quite a while to try to figure this out. And very often, by the time he figures it out, his own solution is unreal or untrue. Because near the end of his figuring, a certain sense of respectability comes in on him. And he manufactures some noble purpose which he had no intention of actually achieving. It sounds nice to say that he would love to give his life to the service of others. But this is not really his conclusion. It is his defense against the fact that he has no actual dedication to anything. So without any real source of organization, without a goal which he is working for tomorrow and next week and next year, it is natural and inevitable that he would not have strong enough allegiances to anything to bind him and to tie him. It is also noticeable how allegiance to proper causes lengthens life and improves health. The person who has something he must do will live to do it. And the individual who has nothing important to do has probably already experienced within himself that he is dead. Therefore, he might as well lie down and make it complete. The person with real objectives also has the tendency to plan. A person who really wants to achieve something that is important and useful has already discovered that you cannot simply bluster your way to attainment. You have to plan. You have to build. You have to sacrifice a certain amount in order to attain the purpose which is dominant in your life. You then build your life around a purpose. And that which is not essential to the purpose, you find it comparatively easy to relinquish. If, however, you have no purpose, you have a tendency to hold on to everything because it might be useful sometime. This becomes the base of gadgeteering, of endless accumulating. The person who does not know what he is going to want or need either throws away too much or too little, and again involves and complicates his life. Realizing these situations to be the common practice of our time, we realize also that today there cuts through this general inertia powerful streaks of ambition. We are an ambitious people. Why? No one knows. And what we seek to attain is often so abstract that we cannot define it to ourselves. Our principal ambition, seemingly, is to get ahead. We want to go somewhere. But in order to get ahead today, it is necessary for us first to get ahead in ourselves. We have got to organize our own resources. Consequently, those purposes which are most obvious, even though not most important, receive the larger amount of support. The man can see every reason why promotion in his business is important to him. Once he has a store, he is possessed by the inclination to have a branch office. By the time he has a couple of branch offices, he is under the utter compulsion to create a chain system. And so it goes. Moved by these compulsions, he tries to build a life around a small area of visible, physical, or obvious attitudes and actions. This, in turn, does cut in upon his leisure, increases his worries, triples or many times multiplies his responsibilities and gradually undermines his energy resources. The more he has in the form of unnecessary possessions, the more energy he must expend on them, and therefore the less he has either for his own living or even for his own survival. And life today, although science has given us many protections, is hazardous to the person or for the person who has strong ambitions. He will usually have a shortened life as the result. Ambition in itself has always been subject to a great deal of philosophizing. Ambition is a drive which we all possess to some degree. The individual apparently lacking in ambition is marked as one least likely to succeed in anything. There are some persons in whom the ambition elements are comparatively negligible. These persons have no desire to transcend their present station in life or necessarily to improve themselves further than is necessary for comfort. This type of person does not have any very great psychological pressures. If he had pressures, he would become dissatisfied. Lack of pressure may cause lack of dissatisfaction. The person simply does not have the initiative to want more or to believe that he can achieve more. He has certain comforts and securities as a result, but he is likely to vegetate. He is not likely to make any very powerful contribution to himself or anyone else. Assuming that his life is intended primarily for growth, he is not growing very rapidly. The other end of this pattern, the other extreme, is the person who is simply a bundle of ambitions. Everything he does, everything he thinks, is keyed to some advancement of himself. He may become ruthless and struggle on, impoverishing or destroying or injuring those around him. With nothing on his mind but his own success, he is a danger to all concerned. And at this moment, this tendency is overstrong among Western people and is certainly endangering the security of civilization. The individual living only to use civilization for his own advancement cannot safely lead a people, nor can he preserve the peace and integrity of collective life and relationships. Now we know that in our daily living, in our personal way of life, there is a certain struggle continuously going on. We want to have a certain sense of growth. At the same time, we do not want to come under the illusion and delusion of psychic pressure. We want to achieve moderately. We want to have what is necessary for our respectability and our security. We would like to get somewhere in the larger meaning of that thought. And yet, the moment we permit ambition to take over, it becomes habit forming. And once we have come under its influence, we can seldom again escape from it. It is like a powerful narcotic. It kills out something in us even as it satisfies something else. Also, ambition, as it becomes more pleasurable, takes all of our energy allotment. It gives us so much one-pointedness that we become blind to too many important values. Ambition in the home has broken thousands, millions of homes. Ambition in the family has resulted in misery for the children. And this pattern has been passed on as a heritage from one generation to another. So to attempt a balance between what we might term a kind of mystical abstraction and this fiendish intensity of ambition which we know today, to find balance here, we have to do some work of our own. It cannot all be done for us. We have to make some decisions, and we have to have the courage to live them after we have made them. If we fail to plan a life, the life will get out of control. There is no way to prevent it. Pressures of circumstances, insistences of conditions around us will injure us unless we are stronger than these pressures. Ambition gives us a certain available will energy. The will to be, the will to have, the will to power. These are all aspects of a fundamental pressure, which is the will to live itself. Without the will to live, things would crumble, fall apart, and wither of themselves. We exist only because we continually direct a certain kind of energy from the inner nature of our being outward into the body. Every time we raise our hand, every time we speak a word, every time we think a thought, we accomplish these function processes by willing to do so. This willing has become so automatic that we no longer consciously recognize it. Well, all we know is that if we overdo any of these things, we become tired. And because of this, we have a general lowering of vitality. One answer, of course, is that you cannot keep energy moving continuously in one direction. The individual wills to achieve because of effort, and effort cannot be continuous. The moment, therefore, that effort is relaxed, the will factor diminishes. Also, if the effort is exhausted, the will factor is no longer supported and may fail or fade out even more rapidly. To maintain a certain attitude continuously means, therefore, continuous willing to do this. And this willing in a continuous chain of patterning is probably the greatest cause of exhaustion which man is capable. On the other hand, is this tremendous willing the secret of true power? We have long thought that it was. We have long believed in the power of force over persuasion. But as we go along living from day to day, it comes to our realization that this will, as an inevitable driving force, its very irresistibility, so-called, creates obstacle. And the immovable object comes into our life merely because of our own drive. If we drive far enough and hard enough in any direction, we will hit a solid wall. Sometimes this wall is very near to us. Sometimes it is quite remote. But if we do as we please long enough, someone is going to object. Something is going to fight back. And the very things that we do may turn upon us, because the will to do them does not necessarily convey the fact that they are right or that they should be done. If, therefore, we will to do that which is not right or proper for us, the reaction comes almost immediately. But we may say that this pressure of will, this determination to get ahead, this willingness to fight every step of the way for success, this internal subjective belief, this archetypal concept that we must fight to get there, makes the fight important. And while we think in these terms and try to live according to them, we are paying for our folly with our life and our energy and our consciousness. Let us assume, therefore, that we are not so different from the pupil taking music lessons. In singing, the great trick of a great voice is not to bellow. The idea that you can reach the back row of the great auditorium by bellowing is a mistake. All you will get by bellowing is apoplexy. And if you bellow enough, you will empty the house. Because no one wants to listen to such roaring. And a great many persons, I've heard them, when they pick up a telephone to talk to someone, apparently come under the illusion that they actually have to talk loud enough to be heard in the neighborhood where they are calling to. Instead of speaking moderately into the phone, they shout, apparently under the delusion that as their neighbor lives 20 miles away, they must talk loud enough for him to hear them without a phone. This is nervousness, this is tension. But it makes a telephone conversation entirely objectionable and often results in the fact that the words are not legible or not audible correctly because of the tremendous amount of energy. Consequently, we learn in singing that two things constitute the carrying power of a voice. The first of these is the proper use of breath, which in this case is energy. If you get your lips, your mouth, and your front teeth out of the way of your breath, it will go much further than it will with bellowing. If you get yourself out of your way in the things you do, much the same will occur. The second important thing in transmission is diction. That the words be spoken sufficiently clearly so that they can be heard and understood. Most persons want to be understood vocally and audibly while their jaws are locked. This means that they've got every bit of energy they can possibly expend tied up in the jaw area. Well, if the jaws are locked, the voice cannot express properly. So in the development of music, a comparatively small, frail person may fill a complete auditorium because they know how to use voice. It is even more or less a musical tradition that in a chorus or in an opera, the basso profundo, who must really carry the great heavy tones, is usually about 5 feet 2 inches high and weighs about 100 pounds. Whereas the tenor, who is supposed to have a light, high voice, is apt to be a fine example of Teutonism, probably weighing 250 pounds. But the smaller person, by the use of voice, can accomplish just as much. So in the use of voice, we have again this example of energy. Energy wisely directed without effort. If the person tries too hard, he will have a very dry throat. If he is nervous, he will have a dry throat. And little by little, his own limitations will change him from a singer into a bellower, simply through panic. No longer trusting himself, he tries to make up with force what he lacks in control. We all do this. And in doing it, we get into trouble. We use more energy, injure the body, and destroy the pleasantness of our relationships with other people. Therefore, we know from actual development within arts particularly the tremendous value of a suspended ego, one which functions only within a comparatively moderate range, and that to the degree we are able to escape the determination to press things, to that degree we achieve the most. Therefore, we must say, ethically and morally speaking, the tremendous ego pressure, what we term excessive ambition, is not the best way to accomplish a particular end. And while there may be a lot of defense in favor of it, this arises from a general ignorance. If 10 men are looking for a job, and they are all ego pushers, they are all fighting with every ounce of energy they have, then theoretically, the one who fights the hardest will win. But if there were 10 men, 9 of them pushing with everything they have, and the 10th one not pushing at all, but using energy with consummate skill, he would win. The reason why an energy pusher wins today is because that is about the only kind of person we have in the field. He has no competition from a superior level of personal integration. So with everyone neurotic, the one with the most dramatic neurotics appears to be successful. But with all the others, he is going to disappear before his time. He will only be a statistic, but we are not always able to explore these statistics correctly. They're not available to us. But the daily paper is rather helpful in these fields of research. We see them drop out one by one in this tremendously intensive program of energy waste. Now let us suppose that instead of doing this pushing, that the individual, first of all, finds a cause. Every man is a champion looking for a cause. When he finds that cause, he has a great deal of integrity and value to bestow upon it. Now, if the cause is no good, then you really do have to defend it to the bitter end. The poorer the cause, the harder it is to sell. Now, sometimes a great cause is hard to sell. In fact, some great causes are impossible to sell outside of a proper time allotment. That which cannot be done today may be done 100 years from now. But there are some causes against which resistance is so great that it is almost impossible to advance them. But here we have two factors also introducing themselves. If the cause is no good, and we fight for it, as a salesman trying desperately to make a sales record selling a product which he knows to be inferior. To do this takes a compromise with his own integrity and a great deal of overselling by psychological pressure within himself. He is trying to compensate for the weakness of his product, assuming that if he is strong enough, he can drag the product with him. The second type of person is the one who is perhaps dedicated to a hopeless but necessary cause. a cause that is so far beyond the probability of fulfillment that a kind of martyrdom is almost inevitable. However, this person is in a better spot than the first one. At least he believes in his own cause. And from this alone he escapes a certain degree of conflict. And he is very much able to think in the terms of Woodrow Wilson when he said that it is better to fail in a cause that must ultimately win than to win in a cause that must ultimately fail. So the person with a true cause that is real gains a certain strength from within himself with which to battle the pressures of circumstances around him. But if the cause is no good, he has no strength from within or from the outside. Having decided, therefore, that he must have a cause, and whether we know it or not, we all try to have one. The next problem is to attempt to justify this cause to ourselves. Before we can sell it to another, we must believe it. To try to sell something we do not believe is psychic suicide. The more energy we put into it, the more interiorly we are ashamed of ourselves. This division is not good. If, however, we do believe the cause to be fair, the product to be worthy, that we are actually performing some kind of a common service in the distribution of that product, then we may enter into the transaction with some spirit. Large corporations today are trying definitely to sell their products first to their own salesmen. They are trying desperately to prove to the men who represent them that they do have a good product. And this is becoming essential to the maintenance of distribution today. With the tremendous amount of sales force, the average corporation cannot keep an inferior product a secret. It is bound to get into the grapevine. They cannot afford it. So they try to convince everyone that the product is good. This is psychologically also the basis of our personal decisions. We must believe that we ourselves, as products, are good. That the things we want to do are essentially right. That the principles we stand for are essentially true. If we have this confidence in ourselves, we do not need to use any energy selling ourselves to ourselves. If the product is such that it requires such energy, it is not a good product for us to handle. This is the first saving, is the clarification of this value situation, the detection of a cause, and the recognition that the moment we place ourselves under the leadership of a cause, we allow this gradually to come first. And it is therefore important that the cause be worthy to come first in some respect. If it is not reasonably worthy, we are likely to wake up someday and see that we have given our entire life to a cause that was not good. This may be a greater shock in advancing years than we are able to sustain. Grief and disillusionment often terminate our earthly careers. The next point, after having determined that the cause is good, is to get the magic out of it. Now, it's always pleasant and nice to read about the East Indian fakir who is able to grow a mango tree and have fruit on it in 15 minutes. This is nothing in the terms of American thinking. We sell the fruit before we plant the seed. One of our big problems is the love for speed. Our problem is whether it is well done or not, do it quick. If you do not do it quick, your competitor will do it first. This type of problem presents us with an element of magic. We like to think of ourselves as magicians, succeeding where others have failed because we have some mystic formula in ourselves. This is usually wishful thinking. Nearly any value or cause that is worth supporting or worth dedicating our lives to the advancement of has to build slowly, quietly, and in an orderly manner. Nearly every cause worth being affiliated with also demands something from us. The individual who cannot meet these demands legitimately begins to waste energy struggling with them. A man who opens a certain store and discovers that he must be his own bookkeeper and finds that he cannot make a single entry, let alone double, is already in trouble. He can go on and try to fabricate some kind of a bookkeeping system of his own that no one else can understand and which he hopes the government will never be able to understand. He may hire an expert to do the work for him, but now he must work for another man, in this respect at least. Or he may realize that his business is going to require this type of knowledge and settle down and acquire it himself. Causes make us work. They make us learn in order that we may administer these causes properly. If, however, instead of learning, we bluff, we're in for more energy problem. It takes far more energy to hold up a bluff, to maintain the constant fear that it will be exposed, the constant worry that arises from knowing that we do not know what we are doing. Such worry will shorten life and hasten psychological emergencies. A good cause, therefore, immediately imposes the need for ability. And ability is the subtlest and simplest way of meeting the ambition pressure. If our ambition causes us to equip our natures for certain attainments, then these attainments come with the least waste of energy. If, however, we are not equipped and must stab in the dark at 100 things, hoping that Providence will guide us through or that a happy accident will save us, then indeed we are under tremendous energy strain. Fear comes in, doubt, grief. All these dangers destroy the security of our inner self-estimation. We know we are not capable, therefore we worry all the time. Then, assuming that we have met these various phases of the matter with a certain amount of intelligence, when we come finally to the gradual growth of our cause, if we know that it cannot grow more rapidly than common sense permits, we will save ourselves another waste of energy. We will stop wondering and wishing. We will stop wishful thinking. We will no longer try to force the processes of life and nature. We will accept the fact of the matter that we must judge progress according to the unfoldment of law and life in things, and that we are not magicians. We are actually working persons, striving to build, and we cannot build more rapidly than we can properly place one stone upon another. The only thing that will result from haphazard, hasty building is a wall that will ultimately collapse. For failure to watch, or from too great haste, we open ourselves and become vulnerable to a number of defeats and a number of reverses, simply because we have not made each step important and made sure that the future always rests upon the solid foundation of that which has been accomplished. As soon as we observe that the foundation is undermined, we come into a crisis. More energy, more time, more resources must be expended. Here again is danger of trouble and sickness. Out of all of this background thinking then, and presuming that we have a certain determination to do something worthwhile, we discover gradually that it is not necessary for us to use a great deal of energy to achieve almost any end that is necessary. It is not the amount of energy. It is the direct application of adequate knowledge to a problem. Some years ago, a very famous lawsuit tied up the courts of this country in committees and the government. It involved government transactions for weeks. The lawyers argued back and forth. Nobody seemed to know just what the law was on this problem, and everyone was looking for a loophole to get through. And it went on until it seemed as though the private corporations involved and the government were going to be in for a terrible bill, involving not only tremendous legal fees, but a result not satisfactory to anyone. In this emergency, someone had the idea of calling in whom they regarded to be an outstanding jurist for a final opinion from the top. So they called in Charles Edwin Hughes. And this prominent lawyer, jurist, judge, listened for exactly 15 minutes to the disputing factors, told them what the answer was, and walked out. His fee was $10. And in a few moments, everyone realized he was right, that was the answer. Charles Evans Hughes knew the answer. Therefore, there was no more energy. He could have gotten into the argument for weeks and perhaps have been ill as the result. But knowing the answer, he quietly moved through the situation. That was the end of it. It is this same problem in energy all the way along. The problem is to save your life by knowing the answers. And if you can do so, you will have energy for a great many more purposes. If you can realize that argument will never solve anything, that the actual answer lies always in your knowledge being adequate to your need at any given time. Also, if your attitudes, basically, are adequate to the ethics of the occasion, you will also find this energy saving. You will discover that the success of enterprise, and your own success along with it, the adjustment between you and society, does not require this endless problem of fearing, criticizing, doubting, hating, hurting. These things arise from false, basic relationships with life. And the more false these relationships, the harder we have to fight them, and the more miserable we become. One simple attitude on most of these problems is that truth and error exist. Error being a deficiency of truth in a situation. Actually, truth needs never to be defended, for the truth of the thing is itself immortal and inevitable. It may never appear within a certain situation, but the reason why it does not appear is because the situation does not provide for it. The situation is itself dishonest, or unhonest, or essentially wrong. And under those conditions, truth simply withholds itself, refuses to be present in a negative and destructive compound. On the other hand, error is indefensible. You can do nothing with it. If everyone in the world agreed on it, it would still mean nothing. Because error must ultimately be fought out in nature itself. The individual can bluff his error perhaps for 40 years. Ultimately, his error will kill him, or destroy him, or bring him to failure, because the error cannot win. And the proof that it loses is in the damage that it does. The person may achieve some particular ambition that is wrong, but if he does, it will ultimately turn upon him and afflict him terribly. He cannot win. Therefore, the effort to push error into a position of truth is a total loss of energy. It is an effort to justify some form of wrongness in which the individual is not willing to admit frankly that he is a highwayman or a thief or a crook, but decides to try to conceal this by involving it in some form of complicated ethical subterfuge. But if his process, his relationship, his situation is wrong, nothing that he can do will change this unless he himself chooses to do that which is right. Thus, right need never be defended. It merely need to be accepted. Wrong cannot be defended, and any effort to defend it is a total loss of life. So our tremendous energy expenditures trying to fight for the truth or against the error, these energy expenditures are not meaningful, nor are they productive of anything. The way in which truth is best defended is by being allowed to express itself. That which is true will always be manifested if man does not interfere. If we do not put false things in front of truth, the truth will not be obscured. If then we find that the truth is obscured, we have only a simple decision to make. And that is, do we wish to reveal the truth and allow it to lead, or do we not wish to? The answer is not, however, so simple in result. If we wish to reveal the truth, we place ourselves in the strongest possible situation as far as our own health and life and security are concerned. If we do not wish to reveal the truth, as we make this decision, let us accept its consequences. Let us accept sickness, broken homes, sorrow, disillusionment, pain, mental disease, and a mass of character infirmities that will inevitably result from the compromise. We must accept them, and we must blame no one else for them, for they result directly from the individual choosing wrongly. Now, it may be that in the beginning he chooses without realizing that he has chosen wrongly. If this is the case, and he is honest, it will not be long before the consequences of his mistake will reveal themselves rather clearly. He must then have the courage to change his ways, for it takes a great deal of energy again to keep a mistake alive, and very little energy to let it die. Always also we must decide whether we want to die for the mistake or would rather have the mistake die and let ourselves survive. There are thousands, millions of persons every year who die as martyrs to their own mistakes, simply because once having made a mistake, they have not the courage or the integrity or the vitality to correct it. From this, and this is only more or less a survey of the situation, we come gradually to the Zen realization as we find it in Asia. Namely, that if we move with the law, we move with principles, if we are only doing those things which are real or valuable, we can accomplish them by what is called effortless effort. Now, this probably does not actually mean that there is no effort at all, but that there is such a minimum of effort that where the facts of things are evident, where the courage of man is real, where the integrity of the individual is founded upon internal principles, and where security exists inside rather than dependency upon security outside, where the person is right, achievement, progress, success, attainment, individuality, all of these things are maintained by what may be called effortless effort. This means that they are simply allowed to be themselves. The individual simply permits himself to think as he thinks. And if his thinking is solid and right, his thoughts will guide him along the way of his problems. His emotions, vitalizing only that which is worthy of his emotions, and only in a proper way, will not turn upon him with a destructive power. We know in nature, for example, that emotions, like thoughts, come under the censorship of their own consequences. We know that a simple, quiet, cheerful, loving attitude toward life is helpful in maintaining not only personal integration, but social integration. That the moment an individual is unkind, he is doing something to himself. And later when he goes to a psychologist and is psychoanalyzed, all this unkindness flows out of him like poison. He knows this. He realizes that no matter what anyone does to him, he cannot afford to be positively hateful for any reason whatever. If he is allowing himself to nurse a grudge or to perpetuate a grievance regardless of motive, he is digging his own grave. When he knows this and acts accordingly, tremendous amounts of energy waste come out of his life. He is no longer giving himself to the perpetual nursing of negative attitudes which cannot do him any good. Now this brings us perhaps to the next point in the situation, and that is the effect of this, we'll say, relaxed approach to pressure upon individuality. If we do not fight, is someone going to walk on us? Are we going to be trodden underfoot? Are we going to be imposed upon? Are we going to be exploited? Will others take everything from us? In other words, to what degree can we maintain ourselves without defending ourselves? This all depends upon our own relationship to fact. If the individual is fairly certain from experience that the attitudes that he takes are truthful, factual, and actually real, if the principles for which he stands are actually good, he does not have to fight for them, because these principles fight for him in another and mysterious way. The only time the individual is in danger of having his individuality destroyed by relaxation is when the individuality itself is false. The individual who is less efficient, less organized when he relaxes, was never organized anyway. Actually, he merely had an intellectual group of allegiances, patterns that he kept alive by energy. but patterns which had no relationship to his own interior life. If his values are straight, he handles them just as well when he relaxes as when he is tense. In fact, better. Because tension must interrupt and undermine his intelligence in the administering of his energy allotments. The moment he thrashes around trying to save a situation, he loses it and himself with it. The tremendous, immutable, and inevitable power of fact is the only thing any of us has to depend on. Therefore, our relationship with fact is the basis of our security. The moment an intemperance or a prejudice or a false opinion or an intolerance, and the moment any of these attitudes take us away from fact, they take us away from essential strength. The moment we lose essential strength, we must push. And the moment we push, we are exhausted. And the end which we attempt to attain by pushing cannot be attained, inasmuch as it is some way wrong, or it would not have forced us into this situation. Now, there are many people who say the moment we reduce our individuality, we would have a slowing down of all of the important projects of life. I question this very much, inasmuch that man has always been a relatively active creature. Sometimes he is lazy for a while, but usually in the end he turns back to creativity because it is a value within himself, something that he cannot utterly deny. In the personal life of the individual, no one is imposed upon because he relaxes. He is imposed upon because he is stupid. And stupidity, relaxed or under tension, is still the same thing. We can be thoroughly imposed upon the moment we become angry. Whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad. The moment we get mad, we are all ready to be defeated. We know that a prize fighter who loses his temper, loses his advantage in a ring, because he becomes the victim of pressures which destroy his skill. And in all problems of life, the moment we lose this sense of equilibrium, we lose our perspective upon problems and then open ourselves immediately to defeat. Individuality is not demonstrated by energy push. Individuality is demonstrated by an organization of mental and emotional faculties which leads to certain gifts, certain endowments, certain abilities, certain aptitudes, through the cultivation and development of which we become individual persons. We are not individuals because we get mad quicker than someone else. Nor do we win an argument because we get the first and last words. We actually win only if what we know is superior. If we know this and we know it to be superior, the argument ends before it starts. For that which is superior also estimates the result of its own impact upon that which knows less than itself. And anyone wise enough to win an argument is usually too wise to start one. It isn't necessary. Because we are arguing, trying to prove to people something that they either know because of experience or must discover because of experience. And even if they agree with us, they will continue to be the same. Actually, to instruct where instruction is acceptable is wonderful. It is a gracious acceptance and a gracious giving. But this does not require energy exhaustion. It is when we are trying to force people to do what we want, and perhaps we are right and perhaps we are not right, that we have to fight. And it is an individuality that cannot stand on its own feet, that has to be supported by every ounce of energy we have. So quietude and organization do not destroy individuality. The individual is not submerged because he doesn't fight. He is submerged because he has no clear interior sense of values. It is impossible to deceive the individual who knows. But it is not necessary that this should always end in confusion and struggle. Ultimately, as Zen points out, interior security results in right action. It results in the individual immediately taking the reasonable attitude and refusing to be moved from it. It causes the individual to set his patterns in a way in which the full security of these patterns is available to him. It is not that he is going to be imposed upon. You cannot impose upon an individual whose inner life knows the score. You cannot cheat the honest man, but you can cheat another man who is desperately anxious to cheat you. I know a case of that some years ago in which a man came to me who was in very miserable condition. Someone had been tapping his telephone wires, and he was ready to sue everyone. So I asked him, how was it that he allowed this to go on? Well, he said, I didn't realize it was happening. I thought it was the group that was tapping their wires for me. Now, this type of situation, of course, sounds utterly ridiculous, but it was true. He was trying to get information, and so he was rightly indignant when the other persons used the same means. It is this situation, to know more than your adversary, to keep cool and calm when he starts, and to have no interior determination to exploit him any more than you are willing to let him exploit you. Permit you to relax entirely and be yourself. He can do nothing that it will hurt you. You have no desire to do anything that will hurt him. The energy saving here is incredible. Now, of course, some decisions it takes quite a while to be sure enough and true enough and wise enough to save all energy. But the theory behind it is that we should be working in that direction. The modern scientist today studies the early life of man, particularly the prenatal epoch and the childhood and adolescent periods, and the scientist says, we cannot understand this. In nature, compared with other forms of life, and with the same period of prenatal growth and early development, the human being should live to be 150 to 200 years old in perfect efficiency. What happens to him? His interior psychic stress patterns are coming to be recognized as the cause of his early demise. These patterns, reacting upon his body, result in most of the ailments that plague him. He simply destroys himself. And he does it with a good heart on the ground that everyone else has, therefore it's the fashionable thing to do. But he pays for this fashionable procedure often with 15 or 20 years of invalidism in the latter part of life. Years which perhaps he will not recognize in time, but which he must later endure. It is therefore important for him to decide whether he should go on the old traditional way and suffer because others do, and try to fight his way through a fight in which millions of others are putting all the energy they have into it also, and lock this energy in the most wanton waste that has ever been known. For man's waste of energy is like his waste of money. Today we are wasting on materials which we hope will prevent war. Enough money, could it be turned to other directions, to advance our civilization and culture 100 years in 10. But we are fighting for old, worn-out concepts, trying to fight our way through a situation which ultimately must be sustained by truth alone. What we need mostly in this world is interior, intelligent honesty. And with that, these problems would be solved. And they would be solved in the way they should be solved, for the greater good of all men. And in our personal lives, we do not have to fall under this hypnosis. We can at least make a good try to make some principles work properly. People do it. Individuals have succeeded. And in every community there is a percentage that through one dedication or another is actually trying. And that percentage is actually succeeding according to the measure of effort. And individuals that a few years ago were miserable have gotten a new look at themselves, reorganized their affairs, and are now comparatively secure. They have discovered that security is not their relationship to society primarily. Their security is their relationship to themselves. The individual who has the proper relationship to himself will seldom be unemployed, even in difficult times. Thus, in every way, these circumstances work together to make a constructive pattern. To relax is necessary, but the individual, when he relaxes, should be a better person and a more intelligent person than he is under tension. If when he relaxes he falls into a hole inside of himself, this is an indictment of his own nature which he cannot afford to ignore. The person who is different when he relaxes is a psychotic, because there has to be conflict between the outside and the inside, or this difference could not exist. The person falling into himself should fall into strength and not weakness. It is evident and true that a certain amount of energy is lost in transmitting interior concepts to brain faculties and moving them out into the world as action. A minimum amount of energy is necessary for this, but some. Therefore, factually, the individual is never able to express his full potential. If he manifests 9/10 of himself on the outside, the other 10th is lost in terms of transmission from the inside to the outside. On this ground, the individual, more or less moving into himself through relaxation and through quiet coordination, should find more inside than there is on the outside. His judgment, his understanding, his knowledge, his appreciation of values, his simple humanity should be much stronger on the inside than it is on the outside. Because on the inside, he has no conflict with anyone else. All conflict has to come from the outside, as far as persons are concerned. The only conflict he can have within his nature is conflict with himself. And any individual who has conflict with himself has a job on his hands right now. Clear it up. It's bad enough to live in a world of conflict. But unfortunately, the conflict in the world is nothing but a symbol of the conflict inside of people. It has caused nothing but misery on the outside, and it will not be more successful on the inside. So when we relax, we should not have to guard ourselves. We shouldn't say, I don't dare relax, because if I do, I'll do something I'm sorry for. actually going into quietude should give us access to a greater measure of security and integrity than we have ever previously experienced. If this is not the case, then the psychic nature of the individual is loaded with undigested tension, stress, fear, neurosis, frustration. And this is preventing him from being able to live with himself. And trying to fight through this every day in an effort to keep a job means that he has to go through an entanglement that uses up not 10% of his energy, but 90% of his energy before it ever reaches the surface. So our own psychological organism, if it is involved and confused, wastes our energy before we have a chance to use it for creative work of any kind. We have to do something about it. If it showed on the outside, we would do something about it. If the average person walking down the street was covered from head to foot with cobwebs because of the entanglements of his inner life, he would soon get rid of them because others would see them. And they would mark him as being a person who is not as able or proper as he should be. We wish to conceal elements of poverty or of lack of organization. And if these things visibly deformed us, or were immediately traceable by other people, we would correct them out of vanity alone. But because we hope no one will ever know them, that we can conceal them, that we can bluff through them, and try to make other people believe that our exhaustion is due to hard work, when in reality it is due to neurotic conflict. And other people who know better will agree with us because it seems a more social thing to do. In this way, falseness goes on through the years. If we can gain this a better organization, we can emerge as people. Some of the world's most interesting, vital, and important persons have never been these terrible fighters. Most of these fighters have gone down into history for the ills they have caused. Most of the great people of the world, the truly great, have been people of peace, who have stayed with principle and have moved with a tremendous integrity that is not sustained simply by vital energy. As I'm speaking, I think, of course, of Mohandas Gandhi. This little man weighing only 90 pounds. This man was not what we call a fighter. He had no army and no bodyguard. Surely, he was martyred to his cause. But he took a ground upon certain principles, and on these principles he was immovable. And in the course of years, these principles won through nonviolence. He simply declined to agree with that which was wrong. And out of this simple decision, supported by a strong inner life of prayer and meditation, this man achieved a change which would have taxed the skill of military dictators. And even if they had won, it would have meant the earth running with the blood of the dead. Dictators worked at the same time as Gandhi, Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin. Their temporary, passing achievements came as the result of frightful costs of life and misery to generations yet unborn. Yet this little man, without war, by simply declaring that there was nothing in this world that could ever hold men together but the silken cord of love, and that all else must fail, this little man created a tremendous change involving the lives and futures of 360 million human beings. A wonderful contrast to the bloodletting in Europe at the same time. So this is a symbol of soul power. The victory of soul power is the victory of truth. And where truth is held, it is not sustained by energy but by principle, by its own substance. And the individual who takes his refuge in the laws of truth, abides with them, becomes the great individual, because he has made the greatest decision an individual can make. And he has made the decision which makes an individual. And that decision is to stay with the truth. This person is strong. He does not have to use energy. He uses consciousness, not to attain some particular end, but simply that truth may have its perfect work through him. And that which truth demands he does, without conflict, without pressure, without regrets, without all these overtones that wear us out. So that with what might be termed an ambition that is already sublimated into an aspiration, sublimated into the service of conviction, we can move quietly and with a minimum of energy toward the attainment of a maximum of individuality. We can recover from the false pressure of the ego itself. Instead of saying what I want, what I demand, what I require, how other people hurt me, what I think of them. All of these processes and attitudes lead to death. The answer always lies, not in our will, but the will of heaven being done in us. And when we let life move through us, it lives, and we live with it. And with a minimum of pressure, we become the maximum of persons. We become truly the great individual. For the great individual, like all others, in various fields, is the one who has lost his life in the service of principle, who no longer thinks of himself as an individual. And because he does not have to defend some stupid individuality, he has the power and energy to permit the great individuality to grow up in himself. For truth is the individual. Truth is that thing which, if it comes of age in us, makes all other things possible. And through the cultivation of it, we conserve energy, we have a greater degree of available integration, we can live with ourselves, and in the long run, people around us live better with us. For we are always more fortunate if other persons know what we mean, and know that we mean what we mean. They will then adjust. They will either see the values, or else they will not continue an association. Therefore, problems that would arise under other conditions never arise if the principle of truth is continuously kept in mind. So all this means relaxation, the saving of life and energy, the directing of works, and the victory of goals, purposes, ends over the tyranny and confusion of inadequate means. And the end of man is a true kind of individuality, an individuality in truth. And the means by which it must be attained is the revelation of truth, the release of value and of integrity on all its levels within ourselves. If we attain this, we do not need to push. We simply unfold, and in this unfolding fulfill a proper destiny. Well, time's up, so that's all we can do with that. Now, next Sunday we have, I think, a very interesting subject for you, and we hope that you'll all come for quite a little surprise. I know it was a great surprise to me. Most of you probably saw either the stage play or one of the motion picture versions of Anna and the King of Siam. You may also have read the book, which tells the story of this lady, Mrs. Leon Owens, who became the tutor to the children of the King of Siam back in the middle of the last century. It all seemed a nice, trite story, and as portrayed on the screen the last time by Yul Brunner, a very intriguing, delightful fantasy. Yet behind this story is an amazing, factual story of a remarkable human being who made one of the most interesting adjustments, probably in the history of Asia. The King of Siam was a very real person. He was a very historical person. And he came to the throne after being a Buddhist monk for 25 years. He became a monk because he refused, being a Buddhist, to compete with his half-brother who had usurped the throne. And when it seemed that he would have had to create a trouble, a revolution, or a conspiracy within the country, he simply retired into a monastery and spent those 25 years studying. He studied everything that it was possible for a man of Siam to study in 1830, 40, 50. He studied art, science, literature, and astronomy. He calculated eclipses. He did all kinds of fascinating things. And then he went to work upon the religion which he had assumed as his life work. And he became the head of Buddhism in Siam. In this position, he reformed the entire faith, bringing it into harmony scientifically with the West, and has been called among his own people the Martin Luther of Asia. He was quite a man. Out of all of these things also, he steered one of the most difficult courses, politically, of his time. For in Southeast Asia, in which Siam is located, he was the only ruler who was able to guide his country and preserve its independence. Every other area near him passed under the keeping of the British, or the French, or the Portuguese, or somebody. But this strange little man astutely talked himself out of every difficulty and was utterly beyond the comprehension of some of the ablest statesmen of Europe. He kept the independence of his people, and he continued to develop a most astonishing character. So next Sunday morning we want to tell you something about the facts of this man. And part of our story, I believe, has never been told before because it has been made possible through the fact that I have recently acquired nearly 100 original documents relating to his reign, including letters from the king himself and from missionaries and other persons associated in Siam with him at that time. And from a philosophical standpoint, and from the standpoint of comparative religion, and as the psychological study of a dramatic person, I think we have a very interesting subject, and I think you will all find it interesting. And here's one lecture you can bring your friends to who saw Anna and the King of Siam in pictures, or enjoyed the delightful rendition by shaven-headed Yul Brunner. Incidentally, Mr. Brunner did an excellent job from the life of the man himself. But of course he could not touch upon what might be termed the inner mainsprings of this career. I'd like to also say that we have for sale this morning the first of our series of mimeographed manuscript notes of lectures based upon requests. And the one we have available this morning is entitled The Energy Fields of the Human Body. And it is a lecture for which we've had a great number of requests. It deals with the philosophy and scientific methods of Anton Mesmer and other related subjects. I'd like to also call to your attention that beginning July 19th, we will have our summer series of lectures in Los Angeles, and we're going to have them at our own place. So we hope that you'll all plan to be with us for the opening of this series on July 19th. If you're not on our mailing list, please let us have your names and addresses so that we can be sure you receive this important program. We have also had a number of separate copies struck off of our editorial in the last issue of our journal, The Nervous Breakdown. We've had a number of people who wanted to send these to their friends whom they think either have had one, are having one, or by the way they're acting, should have one. So if you're interested in slipping something like that in a letter or in an envelope and risking the permanence of your associations with these people, you can secure the separate article at the table. Now we thank you very much for being with us and hope you will join us next Sunday morning at the Court of Siam.